This presentation is about a trip that I was on in London, and I was able to visit programs that were operated and worked in by my friends Sylvie, Mary, and Joe. The programs that they were in were all in what you would consider maybe inner city areas of London. They were designed for families who were living in what they call estates. If you were in the United States, you would probably call those slum areas. They're very dense housing and people with a lot of socioeconomic needs, very often immigrant families. So the first program that I visited was called the Mary Patterson Nursery School, and I visited two locations related to this. So you'll see in the bottom of the sign that there was a lot of funders. So Sure Start, Westminster National Health Service. So they had been pulling in funders for this program. The last I heard from Sylvie, they were really struggling because government was restricting funding, and she was really concerned about the program, which was a shame because it's a wonderful program. To the left, you'll see a beautiful mosaic circle. And one of the projects that they did was they had a parent who is skilled in mosaic art. So the children drew pictures and then they worked with the artist to come up with designs. And they had a series of about four of these mosaic works on the outside of the building. It's really beautiful. And when you walked in, you could see that this was a place where they were welcoming for families. Lots of information for families on the wall behind us. And then when you looked at where the cubbies were, you can see all those binders on the top. So there was information about children, but documentation as well. So they would save pieces of art or stories that the children worked on so that parents could look at those while they were waiting. In each cubby, there was a photo of the child as well as their name, so children could find their items easily. And one thing that was a distinguishing feature of this program is that because there were a lot of immigrant families, there was a lot of use of visuals and not just words. Not only, children don't understand writing at that age anyway, but also not all parents would have understood everything in writing. So by adding photos whenever they could, it helped make this more accessible to parents. So that's, as you go through the slides with me, I'd like you to think about, as with this slide, the way it looks, the way the environment is set up is actually communicating something to families. It's communicating that this is a place that's geared for families and trying to be as open and sharing as much with families as possible. And you could see this throughout the program. Another way that they communicated how open they were to families is by collecting little artifacts, and parents would bring them in, families would bring them in from different countries that they maybe had moved from, or people would bring in pieces of artwork. And then, of course, you can see one by a child. So there was an effort to display things in an appealing way. There were actually a couple of big posters about where do our families come from. You can't even imagine how many countries were represented in this center because they're so close to Africa. A lot of African and Middle Eastern countries had children in the program, but also throughout the United Kingdom. And then if we had kept, showing all the bulletin boards, there was Europe, Asia, just an amazing variety. So around the room, they had little hanging pennants of flags, and you can see that they put up a Canadian flag to welcome me. Although that's about the funniest looking maple leaf I've ever seen. But anyways, the thought was wonderful. It was really sweet to see that, and the children were excited about it. Other ways that this center reached out and shared what was happening with children. They had lots of photographs of children displayed around the room. So, friends in the program, their family members. Also, the top corner, you see something called Zach's Gallery. And they had a project where children could take home a digital camera and take photos of whatever interested them. And they could bring the camera back to the program where they worked with one of the educators to get the images off, and the child then would choose the ones they wanted to display, and they would talk about why they chose them. And so one of the things that was interesting on Zach's gallery is he'd taken a picture of the red, I'm not even sure what that was, but that red um, structure at different times of day, because he was fascinated by how red it looked at one time of day, but at another time of day it didn't look so red. So that type of pedagogical narration was done throughout the program as well. Another really important part of the mission of this center was to make sure that children had opportunities to explore and to connect with nature. Because, as I said, they were in the middle of really densely populated London. So, not a lot of options to see anything green, and anything you did green was in a see that was green was in a very structured park. So what they did was they had weekly forest school, and every week a group of children, so they're represented on the right hand side of the bulletin board. Those were the children that went for that particular session. So that group would go to the woods. So they would actually take them on city buses, and they would spend the day outside. And children they loved it. They couldn't wait till it was their turn to go to forest school. The other thing that this program did was they had a weekend camping trip, and they made sure that all of the children who wanted to were able to come and sleep in tents, cook around a fire, and have a full camping experience. So they, of course, had some parent volunteers to help with that, but the staff donated their time for a weekend to make sure that all the children had a chance to go camping. Again, you can see how there are so many visual images in the room. To the left, there was a children's fridge. They had a before and after school club, and children were able to have snacks at any time. So there was a picture of fruit and yogurt and juice to let everyone know that you could have that. And then every day of the week, they would post an actual photo of the food that was going to be served that day. So when they would, come up with a new dish, they would take a photo of it, and it would become part of their collection of cards. And that way, the children who couldn't understand writing were able to look at the photographs and see what they were going to be able to eat. And this was also posted in an area where parents could see it, so they would know what children were eating that for the week. Lots of really creative opportunities for children to explore ideas and do construction. So as you can see, ideas on what you could make, and a whole selection of things that could be used for art. While I was there, the children were very interested in making cell phones out of paper. I'm not sure how it started, but they were cutting the paper into shapes. And at that time, that was when some of them would have seen flip phones. So some of them were folding over and making flip phones. They were trying to write the numbers on the phone and getting a little frustrated. So one of the educators wrote the numbers on a piece of paper and photocopied it, and then they could actually cut them out and make buttons out of them. So to keep that play really going. And they were very busy with that and had a lot of fun with that while I was there. The art really is very much open-ended, so there's always materials for art, and children are invited at any time to use those. So structured art activities aren't something that happen very often at that center. So to the left, what you'll see is a board that has photos of children on it, and that is the board that indicates who is doing what for the day. So there were specific tasks that each child took part in. And that leads us to another important part of their mission, which was to make sure that children had a high degree of self sufficiency and felt like they were capable, um, self directed. And that's because, again, they lived in circumstances where these children probably at very young ages would start being left alone after school. Their parents probably weren't going to provide care as long as they might have wanted to for financial reasons. And these children probably were going to be involved in caring for younger siblings to help out the family as well. So developing independence was really important. And the way they communicated that to children was by things on making sure that children were assigned different roles. You can see in the bottom right, there is a teacher with a broom who helped to get some of the sand because it was quite sprayed quite a ways. But the children basically were expected to get it swept up and get it put into where it had to go, and the teacher was just helping a bit. Also on the top right, you'll see the shelf with all the toothbrushes and toothpaste with photos of children. So the staff would supervise, they would make sure that they were taking the right toothpaste and the right toothbrush, but it was hands off from the staff. Children, as soon as they were old enough, were able to access their own um, things, put them away, to be independent. So this is outside in the playground. First of all, there was a safety meeting talking about what would be safe and what they could do on the metal climbing structures that were put up that day. So it was a really interesting conversation about what the children thought would be okay to do on them. So once everybody was ready, they were free to play, and that was supervised quite carefully. And back in the corner, there was another area that had a lot of opportunity for large motor play. You can see the big planks that are in that wooden box and tires that could be moved around. And what's in the back corner behind sort of the end of the planks, you can see something that looks like a scorchy looking piece of wood on bricks that actually is a little fire pit. And sometimes they would have fires in the backyard, which I thought was quite amazing because I can't even imagine licensing here being a fan of fires in the back. This is sort of the central part of the play area. Mary's up on the play equipment. You can see that how they have some eaves troughing kind of or troughing materials and stands to pour things down. She was just getting up there and getting it opened up. And throughout the yard, throughout the play space, there were lots of plants. So it was, even though it was again in the middle of the city, they had set up flower beds and did a lot of planting, and the children helped with that to bring a more natural feel to their space. So other things that I saw in the yard, to the top left, there were enough rain boots for everyone, and they had extra rain suits, muddy buddies, the whole works, so that if children didn't have them, there was something in the class set that would fit them. So you'll see that right under the photo of the boots, there are children that are putting out some, one is a set of muddy buddies, but some other things that needed drying. So they used the wall around that conversation area to dry things that needed to be dried. And over to the top right, an art center. And again, just options to do art whenever you wanted. It wasn't really laid out as an activity, but the paper, paints, everything was available. And that area had a roof over it, so it stayed like that really all the time. The climate in London is actually very similar to Victoria. So although they get a lot of rain in the winter, they had the overhang to protect some area so they could keep the boots outside, for example, and the art things. And then there was open play areas. So they don't get really as hot in the summer. They didn't really have so much of a need for shade, but the trees did help with that. Then in the bottom, you'll see my friend Sylvie, and Sylvie was telling me she often has her hands in her pockets because it's her tendency to want to help, and she knows it's important not to just be patient and let children do things on their own. So that became her preferred stance. So I thought I could learn from that as well because I sometimes reach out maybe a bit too soon. Lots of drawings that children made of themselves, so they were displayed in different areas around the room. And when they didn't have bulletin board space, they just used brown paper to attach everything to, because then they didn't have to have so many separate pieces hung up. A big bulletin board, that one is mainly for parents, so it says hello in many languages. But again, as you know, children don't read, so this is not something that's really designed for children to understand how to say hello. It's for parents to learn some skills. And also they would put, now they had 1, 2, 3, but later they'll do 4, 5, 6. So to help parents learn some basic language skills just as they're waiting for their children. In the bottom, the exciting thing about the day is the educator was bringing in some eggs that they were going to hatch. So they were talking about what might be inside the eggs. So this is the story area where children would sit, and that's where they'd have story time. They typically, and circle time as well. So anyways, I love the way they handled the situation. If children were saying, I can't see, then the educator would just say something like, I wonder what you could do about that. Or she would say, I'd like everyone to look around, look behind you. Do you think everyone around you can see? So they were very aware of the needs of the other children around them. This is an area that was in a different part of the program, and this is pretty obviously where the babies were cared for. And you can see how they've actually lowered the sofas, lowered their own sitting area, and put a lot of pillows so that the staff would be comfortable sitting on the floor. Really vivid black and white pattern on the kind of zebra rug to show that contrast, and an assortment of playthings. So they were trying to model to parents that you don't have to spend a lot of money on toys. So there were some rocks and pine cones. They used lids from jars. So they had just off the screen where you can't see it, a collection of lids, some measuring cups. They said they would just go to the thrift store and find assorted things that they could put in these baskets, and they would find the baskets there as well, so that children could crawl around and access these materials. This was probably my favorite part of the day, and this is lunchtime. And what I loved about it, I always love lunchtime. Maybe it's always my favorite part of the day, but what was really nice about this one is that the children who were designated helpers played a huge role in how this meal played out. So, for example, you'll see that every child has a placemat that they've decorated themselves with pictures of food that they've cut out, and they're laminated and have their names on them. So a helper takes the helper in charge of setting the table um, helps the adult get the tablecloth and put it on, and then they lay out the placemats. They carry the glasses over. They carry the jugs over of water. So everything that they can handle, they do, and they use those metal containers had the dishes they were eating for lunch, the food they were eating for lunch. And you'll see in the inset picture, that was the helper for that table who was making sure that that child next to her understood what was in there. So she explained, this is corn, this is what it looks like. And um, so what would happen is the children would pass the plate over, and if the child wasn't able or was having a hard time filling up their own plate, then the helper at the table was the person who helped them. So the adult, again, my role, I was told, just sit at your table and keep conversation going, stay, aware, but children run the show. So I love that about it. And it was just charming to hear children saying, "Would you like some more? Yeah, I think you liked the corn, didn't you? I like the corn too." So there was dialogue, not just about the food, but lots of conversation because the children were very aware of each other, and the adult was really there just to keep encouraging that to happen. So we walked across to another program, a similar program, sort of affiliated with Mary Patterson. And this was different in that there were lots of drop in children. So that's why there's a sign called Green Group. Um, all of the children had their photos and names on, so they could pick them off and they could put them up and break them into groups. So we have the green group and the blue group, and the photo of the educator would be put on that as well. So that way, parents coming in, they would have a role in sort of making sure their children were allocated to a group and that they knew who else was going to be in the group that day. Um, they used pictures for everything. So a change of clothes. So they had writing so that the parents could learn some writing skills, but there was a picture of the actual bag that was given to each parent and photos of what needed to go in them. So 2 pairs of knickers and a vest, right? Pair of trousers and a jumper. So that's the kind of thing that they used as a way to easily communicate with parents. Here's something else that I thought was brilliant that has to do with communication. So they use black, on this particular day, they set black watercolor paint out, tempera blocks, and fairly fine brushes. And then they had an alphabet, um, I think an Arabic alphabet on the table, laminated, so that children, if they wanted to, could um, try to make those shapes, those letters. And they also had everyone's name on a laminated piece of paper so that if they wanted to, they could find their name and they could practice writing it, or it could be open ended art. So, whatever they felt like doing. And I thought that use of just a simple black and white was really quite nice to see for a change. This was their backyard, and they had wanted to soften the look of it because right on the other side of that metal fence was a busy street. So they put up wicker fencing, and they raised money to get some wood to build the round platform, and they tried to include plants and planters and use as many round shapes as they could to have a more organic look in such an urban environment. And as you can see, there are children in the inset photo. There was a little quiet space that they had created so that children could go and have some quiet time out in the yard and get some shade. Lots of documentation all around the room. So this was come and read our stories. Might be a little bit hard for you to read on the screens, but on the bottom, you'll see someone drew something in purple. The next one says, "I need red." That's my Rory, the racing car. And someone else said, "I've got a sore tummy, so I went to the doctors." So the stories that they were telling about what was interesting to them in their lives, or drawings as well. And I loved the way they did them in the cartoon shape. I thought that was kind of cool. This was an example of documentation that was displayed at a center where children could do woodwork. So, what you can't see maybe very well is in the very right hand photo. The way they started it out is you could make a plan. You would think about making a plan on paper. So, older children would do this, younger children would use it as a sensory area. But this child had made a photo of what it was she wanted to create. So, her story, first I drawed it and then I made it. I used nails, hammer, cardboard wheels, and then I used the circle. Put it down and hammered it, and that's how I done it. And that was Isra. So just really encouraging children to be creative and to use different modes. So first that very visual approach, and then the hands-on. Um, in the yard, lots of artwork hung up. They had done some, I think it was fabric dyeing. There were photos of that, and they had an arrangement of stumps um, cut, wood pieces cut, to so that children could stand kind of up on them if they wanted to help hang their art or look at it more closely. So someone had provided them with crosscuts of wood for that. A couple things related to how they supported the variety of ethnic backgrounds in the center. So you'll see that the children in the bottom left had access to fabrics that were sort of batik dyed or different kinds of fabrics. And there were lots that they could use and were using as different kinds of headscarves. And up to the right, you'll see that the adult and child are cooking on something that sits on the floor. So more of a stove top for the floor. And at one point, the bowl that was there was used sort of a bit like a cooking utensil on the floor. And behind it, you can see in the metal drum that there was some like a hammered wok, that kind of thing. So really a lot of people around the world do cook on fires that are on the floor. They sit down while they're cooking. And so they made sure that they had some implements like that in the play. And to the on the bottom right of that photo, you see some really brightly colored kind of sari looking fabric. There were fabrics all over the room that children used in different ways. So then we went over to the Portman Early Childhood Center, and the Portman Center was a little different again. It was the type of center that ran some programming for children, but also was very much like a family support center. So they had drop-in programs, programs where parents would stay with children, as well as regular nursery programs. So the poster that I've taken a photo of says children are given outstanding opportunities to learn about the world outside their tightly knit inner city community. For example, the children benefit greatly from opportunities to visit the Royal Air Force Museum and to spend a night under canvas to experience the natural world. So they also took them for a tenting weekend. And then she goes on in the poster to say examples of their work stimulated by these and other visits are displayed around the school, and that illustrates its success in broadening the children's horizons and raising their aspirations. So it was very important for them to have children feel very competent, feel like they were ready to go out into the world and handle it. This is the toy lending library, so toys could go home with parents, and also to the bottom inset photo, they had a lot of DVDs with matching books or just DVDs. You can see we're looking at the poster that lists some of the Bengali DVDs, but there were materials books as well in a variety of languages that could be taken home. Documentation again, they would try to have regular events where men would come in and take part in play, and just basically felt that often the children weren't able to have as much time as they liked with male figures because they were working so much, and not able to be part of their lives as much. And also because sometimes culturally it was a little bit uneasy for them or a little awkward for them because they hadn't seen that modeled to them as children. The men themselves hadn't. So that was a regular part of their programming. More examples of different kinds of documentation. So this is about Sandy. So Sandy's a child that you would say probably would have sort of like an IEP, plans to support Sandy's development. That's not actually Sandy sleeping. That's another story. But anyways, rather than having serious looking charts up to remind people of what Sandy's goals were, they had this lovely display and it says, "Who likes to sing? Sandy." And then the goal is for Sandy to communicate that he wants more and to provide movement and body awareness stimulation. So that's the goal. And then underneath, they list activities that support the goal. So the reason that this is effective is there's a variety of caregivers. It's very much a sort of come and go kind of place. So everybody can easily look at this and see what it is that they need to be doing with Sandy. And also, this was provided to parents and provided in um, a translated version so that they would understand exactly what it meant for Sandy to have a goal and what the activities were that were supporting the goal. The photo down to the bottom right, I wanted to show you that sleep time was not something that was set up in this particular center as a group activity. If children were quiet, they had a little quiet area and they had enough staff to kind of monitor that as well as doing the other things that were happening. So children that were tired at any time could ask to go over and have a nap, and they were very happy to do so. Some of them came in pretty early in the morning. So the other thing they did was they would ask parents for ongoing feedback about the program. So again, a strong communication skills. So the parents said what they wanted was cooking activities in the morning and the afternoon. And that's because they had typically been doing the cooking in the morning and then eating things at lunch. But some of the parents couldn't come in the morning class. So now what they decided to do was to have cooking activities twice and change the time of day and the day so that someone who's maybe working on a Thursday might be able to make it on a Friday, or someone that worked in the mornings could come in the afternoon. So you want and we did, and there was several of those posted. So they said whenever they got feedback, they made sure that they visually acknowledged that we are doing something with the feedback that you've given us. Last few photos coming of this particular program. To the right, wasn't sure if you'd be familiar with this, but they had set up a snoozeland area. So if you've ever heard of a snoozeland room or a snoozeland area, they built some of the materials themselves, but purchased some of it. So the lights off to the right are a material that they purchased, but the board, I believe, was something that they'd worked on. So snoozeland rooms are used to, they're all about sensory awareness. They can either calm it or they can be used in a way to stimulate senses and to help children that have challenges in that area. So you'll see that the board that they made had lots of different sensory opportunities, and the rest of the room all the way around had a variety of different kinds of things. There was also a mat area with sensory items, but it was more of a quiet area. So that's a room that not all the children, of course, would come in at once. They would have, a child come in and be able to spend some time in this room. Really a nice way of moderating their emotional, working on self-regulation. And to the left, they had an elephant, that pink thing in the tree. One of those fundraisers had happened where artists paint things and then they're kind of auctioned off. So what they did was they kept track of which corporate sponsors bought them, knowing that they probably didn't really want them as much as they were just trying to support the organization that did the fundraiser. So they made some calls, and one of the people who bought it said, "Oh, we'd love to give you our elephant. We had no idea what to do it with, so we'll donate it to you." So they had this beautiful elephant in the backyard. The mural was something that they were able to um, fundraise for, and it has buildings and recognizable features from different countries that families that typically come to this program um, would recognize. So anyway, that again was their way of reaching out and bringing in as much cultural influence as they could. So that was just part of the corner of the backyard. And I want to finish off just by saying the experience that I had that day was just wonderful. And again, I can tell you that I got a very strong sense of what they were trying to accomplish in those programs by what the environment looked like. And you could notice as we were going through it, one was maybe a little more messy and a little bit more free flowing than the next one, which actually had a much more orderly look. And those again reflected the personalities of the staff, but they still were able to get across the same kind of messages of welcoming and of being a community, not just a center, but feeling like a community. So after I visited the programs, we just walked through a park to finish out our day, and I quickly snapped these because I thought they were just wonderful opportunities to share some pretty cool playground equipment. So to the left was a wheelchair swing. So they had a swing that was large enough, had a ramp on it, so the wheelchair could go in, and there was a locking mechanism, so the child could be in their wheelchair and have a good swing. And then to the right, that whole construction, that wooden area, had pulleys and levers. You could position the different pieces of wood differently, and basically weighing sand, pouring sand, putting enough sand into that one black space, for example, that it would gradually go down and lift something else up. And what I loved about it is it just drew everyone in. There was children of every age. There was a quite a little um, sand digger to the left with his red spoon, and all the way to the girl that's standing up is quite a bit older, and she was every bit as engaged and enjoying it as much as the youngest child there. So it was a public park, great opportunity for siblings to get in and play together, and a rim around the outside so that parents could sit and interact with children and be part of that as well. So I love the way it pulled everybody kind of together. So, anyways, that's it for the presentation. Hopefully, it gave you some good ideas on ways that you can think about what it is that you want to happen in your program and ways that you can communicate that to families and children.